don't know how funny it makes me feel to sit here and look at my house. And my husband and I just had an argument about which room was mine. But thank you all for being here. And you're here because you love him. But you don't love him like I do. And you haven't loved him as long as I have. When the president saw me today, he said, "My goodness, your family has good genes." Well, he didn't know that my name was Jean.
There's no way to measure what you're worth.
And you know, my father was not God, but he showed me what God was like that day. When we come to God with our sin, our brokenness, our failure, our pain, and our hurt, God says, "Welcome home."
Because he lives, all fear is gone.
But the Billy Graham that the world saw on television, the Billy Graham that the world saw in the big stadiums, was the same Billy Graham that we saw at home. There weren't two Billy Grahams.
All right, joining me now is a man heavily influenced by Billy Graham. He's a senior pastor at the New Hope Chapel in Plymouth, Massachusetts, Pastor Neil Eaton. Thanks for being with us, Pastor Eaton.
It's so great to be with you, John, and the audience there.
Well, I want to start by going back and playing a couple of clips of Billy Graham, one in South Africa. Both of these clips are actually in South Africa, and we'll talk about them right after that. Take a listen.
Great.
Now, Jesus was a man. He was not a white man. He was not a black man. Christianity is not a white man's religion, and don't let anybody ever tell you that it's white or black. Christ belongs to all people.
All right, that was the Reverend Billy Graham speaking at an integrated crowd of followers in Johannesburg, South Africa. Graham had a commitment to integrating the largely segregated Christian church in the southern United States as well in the 1960s, even acknowledged by Martin Luther King Jr. himself. But in 2005, right before giving his last message to America, he told the Associated Press that he regretted something about his work with the civil rights movement, saying, quote, "I think I made a mistake when I didn't go to Selma. I would have liked to have done more." Pastor, talk to us about Billy Graham. This is a man who obviously did so much, but even at the end of his life, he wished he had done more. That just speaks to his character, does it not?
Absolutely. And what he did, I think it was in Chattanooga, whenever they had the ropes up to segregate, he made sure that they took the ropes down. And when the lead usher refused to do it, he himself left the platform and tore those ropes down. And I think that he certainly... I think when you come to the end of your life, you look back and you say, I wished I could have done more, but he certainly did a lot. And I know that Martin Luther King Jr. Considered him a great support. And so I think everybody would, at the end of their life, have some regret, you know, thinking they could do more. But he certainly did a lot, especially for the civil rights movement, as you just heard in that clip right there.
Yeah, and you know, in South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa in the 1970s, this was a courageous thing to do. And you spoke at a conference 2 years ago where you used Billy Graham as an illustration of being a solution during the civil rights movement because he courageously pioneered the way for white people to stand up against racism. It would seem like we need another version of Billy Graham today.
I absolutely agree. We are right here in Plymouth, Massachusetts. We are trying to make statements like that as well, because as he said, there is no difference. We all come from one race, Adam and Eve. We're all one. And I agree with you. I think that there should be more voices that are more unifying. It's easy to get into vitriolic language, and I think it just stirs up even more anger. But how can we find peace together? How can we be peacemakers? You know, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And Billy Graham was one of those, and I agree with you. I think that we need even more voices that will courageously lead the way. And, you know, I found that when I listen to people of a different ethnicity or color, I want to hear what they have to say, because people aren't listening to each other. And it's so important.
That's true.
For us to do that.
You say Reverend Graham influenced you as a pastor. Is that why you became a pastor? I mean, we have a picture that you sent us of a church bulletin when Billy Graham spoke at Memorial Hall on December 20th, 1970, where you preach every Sunday morning. Have Reverend Graham's teachings influenced any of your sermons specifically?
Oh, my gosh, absolutely. I became a Christian because of Billy Graham. I was a 12-year-old in Weymouth, Massachusetts. My family was slowly disintegrating, and it ultimately wound up in divorce by the time I was 15. And man, I felt the pull, the gravitational pull to the things of the world, and I was becoming slowly a prodigal. Whenever I heard him on a crusade on TV, all alone at my house one night, and I heard the message of forgiveness, I heard the message that Christ died for us so that we could be connected to God our Father, I wanted all of that because it gave me a sense of purpose. Ultimately, it took me a few years before I overcame struggle with sin, but ultimately the seeds that he planted in my heart, because my life changed so radically in my 20s, I couldn't help but to overflow, to want to see other people. So yes, Billy Graham absolutely influenced my life to become a pastor. And my preaching, every week I think of him in the back of my mind. Whenever people make decisions to follow Christ, every week at New Hope Chapel up here at Plymouth, we're seeing more and more and more people, a lot of young people are finding hope in Christ. So yes, he has impacted me in a big way.
Today's celebration surely was, today's funeral, I should say, certainly was a celebration of his life. I think that's what we all kind of hope for when we leave this world, that people will remember us in the best possible way. One of the silver linings of the loss of Billy Graham this week has been remembering his crusades and seeing a lot of those clips from the crusades played back on television. And Neil, we listen to these. What should we take away, and how can we live our lives based on what we learned from Billy Graham to be better people in this world?
I think we should realize what his daughter Ann said, is that, you know, in the book of Joshua, when Moses, the great leader who brought about the great exodus from Egypt, when he died, God spoke to Joshua and he said, "Moses, my servant, is dead." And he looked to Joshua and he basically said, "It's your turn, be strong and courageous." I think that what should happen is we should, as Christians, people that are already believers, we should look at the homecoming, the graduation to heaven of Billy Graham as an inspiration for us to realize, like she said, it's like a shot across the bow, that we need to be a voice, and that, you know, about how we should live our lives. Our message has no power unless the character within us is becoming more Christ-like, especially in the way that we love one another. So we need to realize that our character needs to line up with all that he did for us, and so that we truly become Christ followers. And that is shown in how we love people, even our enemies.